Hey everyone, it's Lindsay. Welcome to week 5 of the semester. Things are better here for me. We're not under evacuation order anymore. There was some sunshine and good air this weekend, so I got to drink coffee out on the porch, which is my favorite form of self-care, and so that is much better. So for this week, we are going to continue talking about the major mental illnesses, this week specifically focusing on depression, borderline personality disorder, and dissociative disorders, which is a grouping of disorders. We're also going to talk about seeking professional help. What does that mean? What does it look like? What kind of options do you have? And, what are sort of the positives and benefits of both? So, depression is one of the most common mental illnesses in the United States, second only to anxiety. Anxiety is experienced by a lot of people to bigger and lesser degrees. Depression usually is a state that lasts for 2 weeks or more. A lot of people might have chronic depression where they go through multiple bouts of it throughout their lifetimes or persistent sort of bouts of it. Whereas anxiety can be something that crops up even in people who don't necessarily have a diagnosed mental illness. Depression is one of the biggest factors that college students experience, and so that might be something that you're really familiar with. College students face depression for a lot of reasons, and a lot of it has to do with sort of the overwhelming weight of life. Sorry, kitties, stop it. So when we're thinking about depression, like all the other sort of mental illnesses that we talked about last week, there are a lot of different sort of factors in mental illness, particularly in depression, that look at sort of biological underpinnings, hereditary sort of related stuff, as well as just sort of life contextual sort of things. People who are depressed tend to be very down. That's what we all associate with sort of the word depression, of a feeling of being down and things are not good. However, some of the bigger sort of misconceptions about depression will be addressed in this week's depression TED Talk that talks about sort of the opposite of depression is not necessarily happiness, but instead vitality. And a lot about the understandings of depression that people don't understand is not, it's just not, oh, I'm just sad all the time. There's a lot of, I'm just nothing all the time. And so that is a different sort of take from there. Next, you'll watch a video about borderline personality disorder. Borderline personality disorder is oftentimes used sort of as a catch-all disorder. There are some specific sort of things that delineate borderline personality disorder from other sort of mental illnesses, but for a lot of professionals, they kind of use it as their diagnosis of last resort. A lot of people who are diagnosed with borderline personality disorder will go through several different sort of diagnoses of different sort of things. Borderline personality disorder is much more characterized about how you behave and how you experience emotions in a day-to-day sort of thing. We have a video this week with somebody talking about sort of their experience with borderline personality disorder. Finally, the last grouping of disorders is dissociative disorders. Dissociative disorders run sort of a gamut, and there's also a video for those this week. When most people think of dissociative disorders, they think of dissociative identity disorder or multiple personality disorder. We've seen media, particularly Hollywood, make really big deals out of this, and oftentimes the movies are not portrayed well. Oftentimes people with DID are portrayed as being homicidal or somehow criminal or other sort of things, when in reality, when we look at all dissociative disorders, at the root of all dissociative disorders is trauma, usually severe trauma, particularly childhood trauma. And so oftentimes disassociation, in whatever sort of form that it takes, is a way to escape trauma. Kids who are severely brutalized, sexually, physically, verbally, all those sort of things neglected, oftentimes will split within themselves as a coping mechanism to try and survive the horrible things that are happening to them. And so the idea that Hollywood paints that, people with DID or other sort of dissociative, that when they're in some sort of altered state, they just go and do all this criminal sort of stuff, is really a harmful stereotype, because most of the time these people who have dissociative disorders are deeply traumatized sort of people. And this this is just the best way that they can cope with it. And so there is, again, a video this week. One of the things that I like to talk about in terms of brains, we know that there's a lot of stuff we do know about brains, and there's a lot of stuff we don't know about brains. Some of our biggest studies in brains have occurred in the past 2 decades as MRI technology and CT technology has evolved. Some of our biggest sort of advances in brain scan technology came in studying orphans. So in particular, Romanian orphans who were in orphanages during the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union, communist Soviet Union, they had the Iron Curtain where a lot of auxiliary countries, in addition to Russia, were behind the Iron Curtain. Romania is one of those countries. In Romania, they had huge amounts of poverty and social unrest and other sort of things. And they had a huge amount of orphans. A lot of people, there was no birth control available. There was so much poverty, people would just give up their children to orphanages. And in fact, the orphanages were so overloaded with children that the ratio of caretakers to children was greatly in disbalance. What happened then is that these Romanian orphans suffered from severe neglect. Oftentimes they wouldn't be held for days. Their diapers might not get changed. They might starve. They have all these other sort of things. And so when the Soviet Union fell and people started to adopt children from abroad, there were a lot of Romanian orphans that got adopted, and they had some severe personality disorders, some severe attachment disorders. And so there were some pretty big research studies that went on to look at sort of the brain scans of Romanian orphans. And so there's a picture from the study in the slides this week. And one of the things that we found is that for kids who are severely neglected, they don't have their needs met. So when a baby cries, generally they have an expectation that someone will come to their aid. We may not know what babies want, and so we try, do they want a bottle? Do they need change? Do they want stimulation? Those sort of things. What they found was that for these orphans in these orphanages that were overloaded, is that their brains started to decay and die when nobody came to their aid. The brain said, hey, if we cry, nobody cares, and so we should stop crying and we should stop having these attachment sort of feelings, because it actually is a way to preserve our being, right? That's really, really sad. And so what we know about brain matter is brain matter doesn't grow back. And so for a lot of people who have experienced tremendous abuse, maybe not being a Romanian orphan, but other sort of tremendous abuse, might actually have parts of their brain die as a protective mechanism to keep them alive and moving forward. Our brains are pretty fascinating in the ways that they try to protect us from a lot of different sort of things. And so we know that brain will shift energies and shift sort of work to parts of the brain that we need for other sort of things if other parts of the brains are being neglected. And so we see that a lot in people with trauma. Finally, the last sort of thing to talk about is psychosis. Psychosis is not a mental illness, but instead it's a state, it's a sort of being. Psychosis happens with a lot of different mental illnesses, and people will experience psychosis as a break from reality. And there's a video in this week's lectures about psychosis. Finally, there are two videos about what kinds of mental health treatment should people seek. Last week I talked a lot about pharmacology, the positives, the benefits to that, the wide variety of these sort of things, how health insurance impacts those, but also thinking about therapy. Therapy is widely varied. There's a lot of different kinds of therapy. There are talk therapies, there's behavioral therapies, there are relational therapy, there's psychoanalysis. And so there's a video by a therapist who goes through different kinds of therapies, just to kind of give you an overview of thinking about what are the different sort of things out there. Therapy is going to be unique based on the type that you get and who does it, and based on the individual who's doing the therapy. And so if you have a bad experience with therapy, try again. There are a lot of different things that can influence if it's a good fit or if it's not the right kind of therapy for you. Keep trying, because therapy really does work when you find the kind of therapy and the fit with a therapist that really is working for you. In terms of who provides therapy, there are a lot of different sort of options. And oftentimes it has to do with sort of training, which then leads to cost and health insurance coverage. And so there are a lot of different ways and different people to be able to seek for mental health support. And again, there's a video there that talks about different kinds of mental health support. Finally, for a lot of people, they have to stick with self-help because that's the only thing that's accessible to them. The self-help book industry is massive, and there are tons of different options there. One of the things that's most important about sort of self-help is self-care, which is why it's such an important part of this class. I want you to be able to take care of yourself because sometimes we are not able to access medication. We're not able to access therapists. We're not able to do a whole bunch of things, but at the end of the day, we can always help ourselves. And so there's a lot of different ways to engage in those sort of things, okay? This week's moment of Zen are quick writes. Journaling is a great way to be able to do some self-care. But for a lot of people, journaling feels big and it feels heavy and it feels overwhelming of like, do I have to get a diary and be like, dear diary, and does it need a lock and all these other sort of things? Whereas quick writes instead can be really shortened versions of those. A lot of people do them in a lot of different ways. I had a friend once who did a gratitude journal, and every night before she went to bed, she wrote down 3 things that she was grateful for. And it could be something like, I woke up today and I'm grateful for that. Or it could be something really cool, like I got a promotion at work. That could be a thing to write in there. So it just depends on kind of different things. And sometimes it helped her to just sort of reflect and say like, yeah, maybe today was a really crappy day, but there were some good things that happened. Sometimes people will do a daily feeling summary, like how was my day? Was I feeling like thumbs up, thumbs down? Were there any sort of things that I want to write about? Sometimes people will do event logs and just kind of be like, what did I do today? And that helps to trigger sort of memories of how they were feeling about different sort of things. There's also ways to do just sort of a short inventory of feelings of, what was something I was happy about today? What was something that I was sad about today? What is something that made me mad today? And just do sort of those sort of things. For a lot of people, that's a way to get into writing about sort of your daily experiences that isn't overwhelming, that doesn't have to be time consuming. It can be a 5-minute sort of activity right before bed. All right, I will see you next week.